Human and labor trafficking happens every day in Minnesota. Some people emigrated here, hoping for a better future. Instead, they become the victims of labor or human trafficking. Looking for work to support their families, they end up caught in a cycle of debt to their so-called employer. How does this happen?
Anyone who has been forced into do various things out of their will, and they are not getting paid for the services they are providing, and facing various mental, physical, spiritual torture, sometimes sexual and violence abuse.
Having somebody do forced labor or services or indentured servitude, debt bondage, really just, I guess the easiest way to describe it would be forcing somebody to do a job or some type of labor that they wouldn't normally do for not a very fair wage.
Hemlal Kafle is the program manager for trafficking and victim services at Catholic Charities. He educates the community about labor trafficking and works with other nonprofit agencies to prevent it. According to the 2012 Human Trafficking in Minnesota report, labor trafficking victims are often domestic, agriculture, construction, restaurant, or hotel workers. Those are just a few examples. Sometimes trafficking victims end up in an unlikely profession.
We had a young man that came in and sat down with me. He was from Kansas City. He was 19 years old at the time that I saw him. He'd come into Minnesota and had been living in a cheap hotel. They'd been living on fast food, and he was getting further and further in debt to the company for his food and his shelter because he couldn't make enough to pay magazine sales, to make enough to pay for what he owed them.
A few years ago, Catholic Charities became aware of a labor trafficking case in the Twin Cities metro area. With a promise of good pay and a place to live, 5 men immigrated to work as roofers. Instead, they were found living in a filthy, cold basement with no food and very little of the money promised to them. They made a daring escape when their so-called employer was intoxicated. St. Paul Police, Homeland Security, and Catholic Charities came to their aid. Sam Felix Alvarado, a case manager for Catholic Charities, helped with the case. He gained the victims' trust and helped them testify against their former employer. He also helped them rebuild their lives.
We're subject to accept the offer that these people were giving to them, that they will pay them more than $100 a day, that they will have a place to stay, enough food and everything. So they were very innocent people.
And he wasn't paying them, and he wasn't, or at least wasn't paying them what they should be receiving. And he had them living in a house. And like I said, the box on the floor, that's where that came from. There was 5 men living in a basement, and they had 1 mattress to share. And so if you didn't sleep on the mattress, you had to sleep on a cardboard box on the floor, in the concrete floor in the basement. They didn't have food. They weren't allowed to purchase food with the money they had. They weren't allowed to get any medical treatment if they needed it.
And to add this other thing, that if they will go and talk to someone, the contractor will call the police or deport them.
The following is a testimony from a Catholic Charities client whose hopes for a better future were crushed when the coyote he and his friends hired to take them across the border from Mexico locked them up in a house and demanded thousands of dollars from them, even though they already paid the fee. Speaking to us anonymously, he told us of his daring escape. He and his friends were lucky enough to find the police. They were assisted by Catholic Charities. They now live and work in Minnesota.
Entre murmullos, nos pusimos a planear cómo iba a ser el escape, porque si no nos escapábamos ellos nos iban a hacer el daño, y porque nos tenían en pésimas condiciones en ese lugar, y pues nos teníamos que arriesgar o tratar de escapar, o pues si no, pues nos íbamos a enfrentar a la muerte, porque ellos ya nos habían amenazado, ya nos habían dicho que el segundo paso de ellos era, si no recibían más dinero de lo que nos estaban pidiendo, nos iban a llevar al desierto y ya sabíamos lo que venía, pues es la muerte de alguno de nosotros o todos.
We need to have a community engagement. Often, when we're looking at the international labor traffic victims, immediately the general concept is this individual is undocumented, they are taking our jobs away, it is immigration issue. So it's what it becomes is it becomes the core issue of trafficking pushed aside. But yet this crime is so hidden that many of us do not know the real problem. And the problem has to be identified by education, outreach, and training.
Many living and struggling on the streets eventually find Catholic Charities. But for the victims of labor trafficking, the path might not be so easy. That's why this organization needs your help. Go to cctwincities.org for more information.